name is Cindy Arnson. I'm the director of the Latin American program here, and it is truly a pleasure to welcome back to the center a friend and colleague, a dear colleague, José Miguel Insulza, the Secretary General of the Organization of American States. We all know from living in this city what the coverage of the Summit of the Americas has been like. There's been an excessive focus on a number of particular themes. One of them I won't mention, but the others have to do with divisions between the United States and the hemisphere on questions of drug policy, on questions of Cuba. There were also supposedly divisions between the government of Argentina and the rest of the presidents of the hemisphere. There was also, I think, some emphasis put on the fact that the presidents that were gathered did not come to a consensus resolution, and that was one area by which the summit could be measured. But I think it's safe to say that much more happened in Cartagena, Colombia, over the weekend of April 14th and 15th that included not only, the important visit of President Obama to the region, once again, but also involved important developments for the hemisphere in general. So to discuss what took place at the summit, we have our very distinguished guest, José Miguel Insulza, who probably needs no introduction to this group, but I'll nonetheless point out a couple of particularly interesting and llamativo parts of his bio. He was elected Secretary General of the OAS for the first time in May of 2005, and then re-elected in March of 2010. Prior to coming to the OAS, he had a long and distinguished record of public service in his native country, Chile. He played an active role in the early 1970s in the government of Salvador Allende, was a political advisor to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and director of the Diplomatic Academy in Chile. Before the coup in 1973, he also taught at the University of Chile and the Catholic University. Following the coup, José Miguel, like many of his compatriots, went into exile, in his case for 15 years, first in Italy and then to Mexico, where he was instrumental in founding and then in leading the Center for the Study of the United States at CIDE, one of the premier research institutions in Mexico that has, I think, one of the foremost centers for studying the United States. José Miguel returned to Chile in 1988, along with others of his generation, to work for the return to democracy in Chile, and was instrumental in the years leading up to the plebiscite that ended the regime of General Pinochet. And then after the return of democracy under a series of administrations in Chile, starting with President Aylwin, José Miguel served in many important capacities in the Chilean government, first as ambassador for international cooperation, and then vice president of the International Cooperation Agency. Under President Frey, he was undersecretary of Foreign Affairs, became Minister of Foreign Affairs in September of 1994, then Secretary General of the Presidency. And then the following year, under President Ricardo Lagos, he was Minister of the Interior and ultimately Vice President of the Republic. José Miguel is a lawyer by training, and I think we have much to be grateful for in terms of the accomplishments of his career and also his leadership at the OAS. José Miguel.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this invitation, and I hope that we can, I'll try to make it to be as brief as possible to make sure that everybody can get his opinion or his question into the panel. I want to begin by saying one thing, because it has been, when I was coming here, there was a discussion in some of the networks on the results of the summit, and somebody who was supposed to be very knowledgeable of what had happened, said something I've heard too many things as not to begin by that. There was no disagreement between the U.S. and the rest of the hemisphere on the matter of drugs. That is completely untrue. Of course, the matter of drugs was discussed. The procedures were discussed. Some of the presidents gave some opinions saying what they felt about some of the issues. But if she's trying to be presented that all the others were in favor of legalization, and the United States was against, that's completely false. Completely false. It's far from what I heard. And I don't know if I cannot be very specific because this was a private meeting. But let me tell you that several of the persons there presented some very strong objections, as much as the President of the United States did. So that's one result of the summit which is completely untrue. There were disagreements on Cuba and disagreements on the Malvinas, but I will refer to those later. But just wanted to begin by this one because it's being said too much and it's completely false. Now, and I'll go into the matter of drugs later. Now, the summit, of course, has been, as you said, has been commented on some things that, one thing that I will not talk about, as you say, there's too much talk about that, and the funny thing is that those who talk about that matter say this subject that obscured the results of the Summit of the Americas, and they are the ones that are talking about it permanently. I mean, so, but anyway, on other matters, I would say that it's interesting to see that some things that have happened consistently for several summits are mentioned as a reason to distinguish this one from the others. One, for example, is the non-approval of a political statement. There was non-approval in Argentina in 2006, five, and there was no approval in Trinidad and Tobago in 2008. So I don't see why there was no, or 2009, excuse me. So I don't see why there was no, the fact that there was no approval this time. But let me just explain a little bit about that. Because in each case it was different. In the case of Mar del Plata, there was a long declaration. I would say that it's the Trinidad and Tobago are more or less of the same size. I wouldn't dare say which one of them is longer, but it was really long. And the issue was only one. All the rest of the declaration was completely approved. It had passed all the instances until some presidents, and this can be said because it was public, the presidents of the Mercosur. Usually they say President Chavez. No, it wasn't President Chavez. Actually, Venezuela said very clearly that they didn't agree with the negotiations, that they didn't want the negotiations, but if you reach an agreement, put it there and we'll put a footnote. It was the countries of the Mercosur who felt that we had gone nowhere in the negotiations, and they had that they didn't want to sign on the free trade agreement of the Americas. This had been, I had told every country that this would happen, but they insisted on it. They insisted on insisting on that issue, and that was the reason why Mar del Plata was not signed. In Trinidad and Tobago, again, there was agreement in a long statement, but since after the statement was almost approved, the economic crisis started. So some of the countries felt that if we did not say some things about the economic crisis, which are already happening, and which were not on the statement, they wouldn't be willing to sign. And since there was no agreement on that, first on saying something and then on what was going to be said, there was no declaration of Trinidad. In Bogotá, in Cartagena, actually the situation was better. Because actually what we did was write down and discuss a series of documents, a series of mandates on each of the issues of the summit. And at the end, a political statement was also discussed. And on that political statement, there was no agreement because some countries insisted that Cuba and the Malvinas had to be on the statement. Not on drugs. There is a sentence on drugs on the statement that is consensual. It was Malvinas and Cuba, which had never been in the past statements, by the way. Probably Malvinas, yes, in the language that was usually accepted before. Now, however, the foreign minister of Colombia in the meeting of ministers and President Santos in the meeting of presidents were very clear to say that we understand, of course, that we don't have the political declaration, but that the mandates that are specified in all the other documents still stand as approved by the summit. Everybody agreed on that. So the situation was better because nobody can say now that they did not agree on those, because it was explicitly mentioned by the chair of the ministerial meeting and by the chair of the presidential meeting, with everybody present. Every country was represented except Ecuador, everyone. Now, what was the summit about? The summit about, I should say, however, a few words about the climate and the situation between one summit and the other. The summit of Trinidad was done under the threat of a crisis. I mean, first with a new president of the United States, and then under the shadow of a crisis. Everybody wanted to know what's going to happen with the new president of the United States, and second, everybody wanted to know how we're going to do after the crisis. 3 years later, the situation was very different. The countries of Latin America and the Caribbean, especially the countries of, I would say in 2010, the countries of South America, or most of the countries of South America, and in 2011, you can add Mexico into that, had a very strong recovery. Their economies had grown, and this created, especially in the South, a certain new sensation of certainty. I mean, after all, before that, we were the ones who inaugurated the crisis, and the ones that fell deeper into them. Now, Latin America seemed to be immune to the crisis. The figures we gave here, when talking about the crisis, did not hold true. We said that about 9 million people were going to go down back down the poverty line. Only 1 million went down went down below the poverty line, and that was recovered in the next year. The economies grew. The debt was there was no more. The financial system stood. So everybody felt there's a new certainty in the region, and many are talking in the midst of the crisis. In October 2010, in the midst of the crisis, the economist was talking about the decade of Latin America. So, of course, as you may all understand, this created a new atmosphere. The countries of Latin America, they were not the same as they had been 3 years ahead, before that. They felt stronger. They felt that the summit that the crisis was not their problem. At the same time, we had 3 years of U.S. policy, or hemispheric policy, in which I would say, to be fair, that the objective result was mixed. I mean, some things happened that did not happen before, and they were along the lines of what had been said at the summit. For example, the crisis in the case of the crisis in Honduras, even though some people have said that this happened, it did not happen. Actually, all countries held together until the situation in Honduras was normalized, with the exception that some countries wanted to recognize the new government before others. But if there had been one of the divisions that usually happen in Latin America and in the Americas, in which some countries supporting the regime and others against it, certainly we would have gotten the result we got. Nobody recognized the Micheletti government ever, and by the way, and the U.S. played by the rules that they had established. They were going to do things together. But of course, I should say that aside from that, another successes, energy policy, the creation of the social protection network, and others, I would say that from the point of view of the Latin American countries, the results, the events of the past 3 years, of the 3 years from Trinidad to Cartagena, were below what they had expected. I would say everybody remembers President Obama made a big splash in the Summit of the Americas, and when he said, "We're going to do policy with you and not for you," that was really felt. And in spite of the fact that I think many interesting things happened, the sensation that there is not such thing as a common policy, there is a common agenda. There is a common agenda. I mean, if we talk about what are the matters of the inter-American system, everybody would mention migration, everybody would mention crime, everybody would mention competitiveness, everybody would mention several things that are there. Human rights, of course, democracy. Trade they would probably not mention, which is unfair because trade and I have a big, long paper on that. I won't go into that matter. Trade is stronger, has been stronger, so very strong all these years between the South and the North and the South. Trade and investment are in a good shape at the hemispheric level. And by the way, the Latin American countries are the largest buyers of U.S. products in the world, except Europe probably. But I'm not really sure about that. But some of our countries, name them. I mean, Mexico is the largest buyer of U.S. products in the world. I mean, of course, much more than China, of course. And Argentina buys more than India. And Chile buys more than several of the large European countries. So trade should also be there, but let's leave that aside. So there's an agenda, there's an agreement on the agenda. But on the path to the agenda, the issues are not being discussed as the countries would like them to be discussed, and that created also a certain atmosphere. What was the atmosphere, I would say? We have to find ways to cooperate in those issues that are pending and that should determine if this is going to be a successful decade or not going to be a successful decade. The issues that were taking over, taking in that direction, I would call the first one, it wasn't called this way, but I would put infrastructure and technology and some other things under the issue of competitiveness. I think that's the matter, competitiveness. Second, poverty and inequality, with a stronger emphasis on inequality. After all, when 70 million people left poverty during the past decade, there's of course a concern of what those people are doing now. And when you discover that income is so very wrongly distributed in the region, so it becomes a big problem. So I would say poverty and inequality, even though this time probably inequality was more discussed. Crime and insecurity. And the last one was something that may seem strange here, but it is important, which is the problem of natural catastrophes, natural disasters, having to do with climate change. Because after all, I don't know if you all know that during the summit, 1/3 of Colombia was underwater. I mean, and that was a bad thing. I mean, and there was a lot of comments in the press and all that. I said, what are we doing in the summit when we have all these catastrophes going on? Everybody unanimously, there's very few people in Latin America who would disagree, and in the Caribbean, we would disagree with attributing this to climate change and the need for a new policy. So that was another issue also. And on all those 4 or 5, I was saying 4 or 5, you count aside infrastructure and technology, you have a lot of agreements, and you have a large mandate to work for the next summit. Of course, they are not all the issues. The state of democracy was not discussed in the summit. I completely agree with that. Those were the issues that were put before us. We would have been ready, of course, for that. But the issues that were discussed were really very important, and I think that they will give us an agenda to work in the next few years. Now, the problems. I think that the problems are important. It's important. I mean, I already said that the Malvinas were not a problem until a few years ago. So I can't remember at this moment if the Malvinas were in the Summit of the Americas. I think not, in the Trinidad and Tobago. But in the past 4 or 5 General Assemblies of the OAS, the issue of the Malvinas has been dealt with the same language that was proposed now. I would say that the main thing was that there was some kind of restlessness about the way in which the issue had been raised in profile the past few months. I would hope that this matter can be again included for the General Assembly or not, I don't know. But I admit this is a separation, the problem that divided all the Latin American and Caribbean countries on one side and all the US and Canada on the other. And by the way, I think that this kind of statement, probably a stronger statement for sovereign rights and all that, would find some obstacles in a couple of countries on the Caribbean. But in terms of just asking for a negotiation, this was a division between the two others. And the Cuba matter, well, actually, the big problem with the Cuba matter was discussed last time and on Trinidad and Tobago, and we kind of decided it. But two things brought it back again. First, the fact that Cuba did not accept the procedure that was decided to for its return to the Inter-American system. They never wanted to join the dialogue with the Permanent Council in regular terms. And then that nothing much really happened with the summit in the next few years. So it was only to be expected that the demand for the presence of Cuba will be present, that some countries would raise it very strongly, that some other countries would oppose, and that there would be no statement about that. I should say that not having a statement about that was a reasonable bargain to have all the countries sitting at the table. So I don't really think that there's much to do about that. I mean, unless there's change in any of those issues, and countries insist that because you can do two things, by the way. You can do two things in the OAS system. When you don't like some statement, you can do two things. One is to say, okay, let it go, but I'll take a footnote. Or you can also veto it. You can say, no, I won't accept. I will not sign the statement until if you want to put that into the and others will say, if you don't put it, I will not sign the statement. And that's when the statement fell. I mean, some countries were not willing to sign on to a general statement in which the Cuba matter and the Malvinas matter was not mentioned. Other countries were not willing to sign it if it was mentioned. So that was it. Let me say that if you ever get a hold of, I don't think it's very difficult to get a hold of it. In the political part of the statement, which I must stress is the only one that was not approved. If you get a hold of that, you will find a lot of political agreement on several matters. And this is what's most important for me. I mean, the fact that we do have a general agenda that we should discuss. We do have subjects that everybody agrees should be in the Inter-American system. They have to do with all the problems that I have mentioned. That aside all the issues that I have mentioned, they have to do with democracy and human rights. And I think that therefore that we are not. This is not a big danger. But I would say a crime of restlessness, feeling that the Americas are not as bound together as we have promised to be. I think that there's still a lot of work to be done, and the summit was much more successful than has been said. And one of the big matters to see if we can move forward on is going to be the last one, the drugs issue. The private part of the summit. This is the only information I'm going to give about it. That was not in the final statement of President Santos. Was dedicated only to the issue of drugs, except for a very short moment, very small part by the end, when there was a presentation by the new Prime Minister of Haiti that was presented to all the presidents. It was only on that, but it was basically on a procedural matter. Now, when presidents discuss a procedural matter, of course they will do it with a lot of adding a lot of opinions of what should be done with drugs. I would say that, however, that it was very clear that there was that everybody agreed that there would be no decision here, not even a line. So the mandate given to the OAS, to say it in the most proper way, is to open different scenarios on the drug matter, and new proposals of policy that will strengthen the struggle against illegal drugs. And I will say also that to that I would add that the link between illegal drugs and organized crime should also be included in that area, where issues such as depenalization, criminalization and decriminalization raised, of course they were. But the general agreement was that that was not the issue of the study. It's not that we didn't agree on one of those, and then we're going to have studies to see if we do that or we don't do it. No, it's going to review the whole policy in general and present different alternatives and different proposals to the president, which they can take or not take within a period, I would say. I would say that this should take us about 10 months, from here to next March. Now, how are we going to do it? We're going to do it with, the reason to give it to the OAS was that, after all, everybody who was sitting around the table knew that there is a mechanism at the Organization of American States called the CICAD, the Inter-American Commission for the Control of the Abuse of Drugs, and that has worked very strongly, and that he has handled all the proposals that we have made through the past years and followed up on everything that we have made on the past years. We have all the information there. We have all the proposals on prevention. We have all the proposals on fighting demand and on health matters. So it was felt that probably that was the best institution, together with others. Of course, what the Pan American Health Organization here can do is really very, very essential. They are working very strongly on this. We will probably try to add the IDB, because, as you know, we have some kind of agreement with the IDB and ECLAC that comes from 1960. So if they want to join the effort, certainly we will be working with them. And the idea, as I tell, is somebody said it very clearly, negatively. It's not to have a new policy proposal. We don't want the study to end saying this is what you should do. What we want is a study to open different avenues, say which are the pros and cons of each of these proposals, and let the presidents decide. One thing that was said also, I think that everybody agreed on that, so I can say it very, very safely, is that we have all of us have to be together. I would say that to be a little bit cryptic, but to explain exactly, the only two mentioned, this was mentioned very strongly by two presidents. One who is very much in favor of changing the policy, and another was very much in favor of keeping the policies. But they both said very strongly, we are not going to do this on our own, because if I do this in my country with all the others doing the rest, this will be a complete failure. If you legalize in one country and you have all the others with drugs illegal, you can be sure that all the drug dealers in the world will be opening an office in your country. On the other hand, if you have one country in which this is illegal, that falls down, especially if it's a consumer country. So I will end up by saying what I said at the beginning. It's not true that there was a disagreement on the matter of drugs, and that's why they gave it to the OAS. It had been decided from quite some time that this will be the beginning of some dialogue. And second, everybody agreed that on this matter of drugs, we're on the same boat, and if we are going to make changes to some policy that we are following for the past 40 years, they're going to be done very carefully, and they have to be agreed on by all the member countries. Was that too long?
Perfect.
Okay, thank you very much.
I think that's a good laying out. Thank you. Well, the temptation from the chair is always to ask the first question, but I think I will defer. No, I will defer and invite questions from the audience. We have a couple of microphones, so if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand, identify yourself.
Pick that up.
You convinced everyone.
No, somebody there.
Sir, over here.
It's always shy at the beginning.
Dr. Sam.
Oop.
Dr. Sam Hancock of Emerald Planet.
That doesn't work yet. Julie, it's not working.
Another one.
Try one more. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm not sure this one's on either. Is that coming through?
Go ahead. Just go ahead. Yeah.
I'm Dr. Sam Hancock of Emerald Planet TV, and thank you for sharing about the dialogue that's going on. Some of the issues that you addressed as far as the environment and the cooperation among all the members of the OAS on this critical issue, and also urbanization, which is very rapidly developing throughout the OAS member countries. Thank you, sir.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. I would say that, well, I personally feel that the two matters are very much connected, as you say, matters of environmental deterioration and urbanization, and I mean, probably the worst focus of deterioration are in the cities and the lack of adequate infrastructure, the quality of water and air and all that. So I very much agree that they are linked, and I hope that they are also in the discussion of the summit. However, I will say that the basic discussion in these papers have to do basically with prevention and mitigation and preparedness for the summit. Several countries don't have a clue about what to do when a hurricane comes, and we certainly have to help in that matter very much, because now hurricanes are coming every time more often than they did a decade or two ago.
Sure. Sure.
My name is Graciela Reyes. I am an independent scholar. And my question is, did any of the issues or the agreements that were reached in the summit, mainly in the previous meetings with the civil society, with the workers, and with the youth, will have some input in the main subject of the next coming General Assembly, which is food security and food sovereignty?
Well, thank you very much for remembering me. One thing I had noted here, but since this setting puts my papers very, very far away from me, one of the things I was going to say at the beginning is that this was a very successful summit from the point of view of the participation of civil society. As you know, the summit doesn't last 2 days, as it was when all the attention is placed. I mean, the day of the summit of the president's meeting. It started with the youth meetings on Tuesday and Wednesday, continued with the labor meetings and with the indigenous people meetings and the other organizations of civil society, and finally with the business meeting. And all those had a dialogue with the presidents or the foreign ministers at least. And well, number-wise, it was the most successful I've been to. There have never been so many businessmen as in the other ones. We've had a very, very successful summit, a business summit, for example, not in Mar del Plata. That was in Buenos Aires before the Mar del Plata summit. But I think this time there were more businessmen. And of course, when you have seating in the summit, when you have present in the summit, in the business summit, not only present but making presentations at the business summit of the President of the United States, the President of Brazil, the President of Colombia, the President of Mexico, and so many. It's really very important. And also, some of the presentations dealt clearly, for example, in infrastructure and energy, with projects that are beginning to work for interconnection in energy in the region. So that means that it was very much well-directed summit. The dialogue of the ministers with the civil society had never been attended by so many ministers, and it was really nice. I mean, because some very strong things were said about poverty, about labor rights, about youth rights, about gender rights, and about sexual freedoms that were probably were not of the liking of many attending, and however it was a really incredibly well handled summit. And let me tell you, we had presentations in the social summit for the first time of people as different and as relevant as President Santos, President Morales, and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, one after the other, and they were all received with the same good manners and good attention by all the members of the groups that were very heterogeneous, but that showed that we have a very vibrant civil society and also a very well behaved one, to be very clear. Now, I think that some of the issues are going to go to the Summit of the Americas, to the OAS General Assembly, yes, but I cannot make a full diagnosis now because the discussion of the final declaration of the summit let me see. The final declaration on food security, food sovereignty, is not it's not in a stage of discussion that I can say it will touch on some of the issues of poverty, for example, or competitiveness that came on the summit. There is something on the summit about agriculture, but I can't say that will clash with something of the assembly. The other issues of the General Assembly at this time, I'm seeing basically human rights, and was not discussed in the summit. The bilateral matters not discussed in the summit. The only matter that could be raised again in the assembly would be the Malvinas issue. That's true, because after all, there was a statement the last session, and it might come up again. And I will not speculate about what's going to happen with it. You know, I have my opinion about the Malvinas. I do hope that some compromise on that can be reached, and the region can go on together. But at this point, I would hesitate to say that any others will come up again.
All the way in the back.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Luis Alonso with the AP. Thanks for the question. Secretary Insulza, several presidents said in Cartagena that that would be the last summit without Cuba. And they implied that they wouldn't attend to the next one, I think it's in Chile, if Cuba is not present. How much certainty is that there will be a summit and the possibility of a boycott of these countries that are...
Well, actually, let me say two things. One, the summit is not in Chile. We had a summit in Chile already. I remember it very well because I was foreign minister who organized it. But the summit is in Panama. It doesn't have a fixed date. What is going to happen, and to begin the answer to what's going to happen in Chile in January, is there is a summit of all the 32 Latin American and Caribbean countries, 33. And actually, not only nobody will not attend because Cuba will be present, and that is the big problem. I mean, we are having this is not an institutional matter. It's not a problem of the OAS, because the CELAC is a community. It doesn't have an organization. It doesn't have a secretariat, and it doesn't have permanent programs, as the OAS does. So this is not the problem between the summit, the OAS, and the problem is that there's instance of dialogue. There's an instance of dialogue between 33 countries, including Cuba, and the other 32, some of them are not willing to go to a summit, not to go to a summit in which Canada and the US are going to be. I mean, they're perfectly willing to go, but some of them are not willing to go if Cuba doesn't go. And let me tell you something that's very interesting, because among all the comments went not perceived. There were some presidents who explicitly said that for participation at the OAS and other regional instances, the democratic clause should apply. And therefore, Cuba probably should not be participating at the OAS until it doesn't accept the procedure that was followed. But they didn't see a reason why they couldn't sit every 3 years to talk with the rest of the Americans. That's exactly what a couple of presidents said. Of course, unfortunately, this was not transmitted by open television, but it was said. I think that was really that. So really, I do hope that something will change in that direction. The Cuba issue is not an issue of whether Cuba is democratic or not. It's what is the best policy to be applied to have cooperation, security, and democracy in the region. And some countries feel very strongly that the exclusion is not the best way. Of course, I'm not talking about the ones who were friends of Cuba. I mean, Cuba is a member of ALBA. I'm not talking about the ALBA countries. I'm trying to explain that there are several countries I won't say in the middle, because there's no middle of that, in between the two positions, that are not particularly of the mind that they are not like-minded countries with Cuba by no means. Some of them have governments who are very much different and very much incompatible with the Cuban way. But anyway, they don't see any reason why not to have a summit because Cuba can be president. After all, Cuba is, I don't know exactly, I would have to compare, but it should be about 0.4% of the US GDP. And there's no, so the reason why the bigger guy should be excluded because the smaller guy is going to be there, or should exclude himself because the smaller guy is going to be there, that I don't think it really makes sense. And if somebody wants to make a statement on the issue of democracy, which I perfectly feel very acceptable, why not have it in the Organization of American States? That's where the issue of democracy, the democratic charter really stands. That's a view which I think has not been explored enough. Having Cuba once every 3 years sit there to talk with the other presidents doesn't mean that you are weakening the inter-American system, from my point of view. But then that's my opinion, of course, and I know some others don't share. Some very good friends that don't share that opinion. Over here. Well, that gentleman before him he was before, yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry, and then we'll take this person up front.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on this. Farzin Illich from Council on Hemispheric Affairs. On this Cuba issue, it would be interesting to get into the substance of this dialogue and how it happens, because we all know that this policy hasn't produced any results. It hasn't led to democratization so much, or it has punished the Cuban people. But this idea of the United States emphasizing this, when in fact we support some very nasty dictatorships, does the question of hypocrisy or double standards, we're arming all these really ugly places in Middle East, and we don't really say much about China's. Does that come up in these discussions?
No, I won't say that, but to be very, very frank, I don't think that we didn't have a discussion on the essence of whether Cuba is democratic or not. Certainly we did not discuss that. I would say that a large number of countries feel it's not democratic. At least it's not democratic, or let me say even more strictly, not democratic according to the precise terms of the Inter-American Democratic Charter. There's no political pluralism. There are no political parties. There is no freedom of expression, etc., etc. Nobody, by the way, no Cuban would argue that it exists. So this is not there are no matters of controversy. Nobody said something different. Of course, when some said some bad things about Cuba, others would raise their hand and say that this was a heroic country. I say, of course, you can always be a heroic country without being a democracy. Nobody tried to argue in favor of a democracy existing in Cuba. I didn't hear that. No, the discussion was strictly on whether it should or not be included in the summit. And all I was saying was that there were not only two positions, but I would say at least three. Some saying that it should, others that it shouldn't, and others saying that it should be in the dialogue, in the summit as a dialogue, but not in the Inter-American system. And I think that's an interesting position to start with, because I very much agree with you that after how many years? It's going to be 50 by the end of this year. 50 years, and nothing happens. So maybe it would be better to practice a policy of inclusion than of exclusion. And by the way, every country has a relation with Cuba today. They all trade with Cuba. They all sit in all kinds of trade meetings and tourism meetings and every kind of meeting with Cuba. But for some reason, they cannot be sitting at the summit. And the U.S. is, by the way, having quite a good trade policy with Cuba. I didn't give the figures. The U.S. delegation, I don't know how hefty they are in absolute terms, but they look heftier than for a few, I would say, 10 other countries of the Americas, with which the U.S. trades less than with Cuba.
This gentleman here up front.
Thank you. Marcelo Raimon, reporting for Clarín, Argentina. I wanted to ask you, after the failure in Cartagena, what is a realistic goal for?
Excuse me?
I think people are responding to your use of the word failure. That's all.
Failure? What's wrong with it?
No, go ahead.
Adelante.
Is that an accent problem? Or
No, please.
¿Puedo explicar? Okay, after Cartagena, what is a realistic goal for Argentina in the Malvinas front? What kind of support do you think Argentina can expect from the inter-American system in general and from the United States in particular?
Well, actually, I think that I should stress that the reason that we did not, it's very difficult to answer to that question, and I will probably wait until after the assembly to evaluate on that. It was that the language that was proposed in Cartagena has been approved at least 3 or 4, I don't know how many, but several times in the past General Assembly. You know, we have the habit, good or bad, it's a habit, of approving similar statements one assembly after the other. So this has been approved several times. At some point, somebody will say, "We already approved that, and why do it again?" So it was the same language. It only says that it only says that we hope that on the matter of the sovereignty over the Malvinas, it says, we should we hope that the two countries can sit together and work on that. And of course, somebody could at some point, because the Argentina has used some very strong language lately, say that, argue against what they say, that we commend Argentina because of the way it's been behaving on this, which I still believe, because Argentina, in the days of the anniversary of the Malvinas, the president said very clearly that we're willing to pursue this by diplomatic and peaceful and diplomatic means. So there was no argument on that ever before. But this time, some countries objected to issuing the declaration. Was it because they didn't want to do it at the summit, for some other reasons, because relations with the UK, etc.? But what happened was that that this time there wasn't a statement that had been there in all the previous summits. I hope that can be recovered in the General Assembly of the OAS, and I hope I will not make a definite evaluation on that until I see if that happens, because I really, as you know, I very much share that the point of view that the matter should be discussed, and that Argentina should have be given an opportunity to present its points of view and try to reach some agreement with the UK. But I prefer not to say if what happened in Cartagena will create a new situation.
I'd like to just pose a follow-up to that, which
Sure,
may be
sure,
unfair given
No,
your
please
statement
go.
that
Please go ahead,
this should
please
be
go
discussed
ahead.
again at the General Assembly. In the case of the Peru-Ecuador conflict, the OAS played the decisive role in having a sort of a negotiation and a resolution of the issue between the two countries. Do you ever see the OAS stepping into the role beyond sort of exhorting the two sides to negotiate a solution? Do you feel that would be an appropriate role for the OAS on this issue, which doesn't seem to, where the two sides are so completely polar opposites?
I think that it's difficult, because actually what happens is that, let's say it, several countries, among them all the countries in the south, believe that this is the case for the Commission on Decolonization and not for, it's not a border problem. They don't feel that we have a problem there of where does the border line be. It's not one of the pending frontier problems in the region. It's not Belize or Guatemala. It's not the problem of the discussion in the International Court of Justice between Chile and Peru. They are neighboring countries, and neighbor countries usually have a relation. I mean, a problem to set exactly fix which the borders are. And this is a possession, okay, about taken by force, about 179 years ago, but by force, by a country of a territory which is very much close to Argentina, or to the rest of Argentina, I should say. So several countries view this as a colonial problem. And of course, I would know that the arguments will be, I don't know if it's going into the matter, yeah, but all the population feels that what would return to Britain. Yeah, of course, if I'm British, I want to return to Britain. I mean, the Argentinian population was excluded from that territory. So it is a difficult problem. I think it's something, unfortunately, I think that we are going to have to live with that problem for some time. And I do hope that there's a negotiation. And I am optimistic that there will be some negotiation, because after all, for Britain, it's also very, very costly, very expensive to maintain a possession in that part of the world while they are on the other side of the world. And by the way, they say there's oil. I don't know if there's oil or not, but if there were oil, they would still need a negotiation, because they cannot exploit that oil without some foot on land from which they can work. So I'm very hopeful that some field will be open to negotiation. So that's why I don't want to push the matter any further, because I think that shouting at each other is the worst way of getting results on these issues. But I don't see the OAS as with the possibility to act in that matter. But by the way, besides, some of the countries are well known to favor one position very clearly in relation to the other. So there wouldn't be very good referees for this matter.
Here, and then we'll come back in the front.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Ruben Perina from Georgetown University, and ex-official of the OAS. To include the Cuba in the summit would have required to change the rules, particularly on the democratic clause, which were established in the Quebec summit and later on. And secondly, would you have invited the Micheletti government to the summit? And thirdly, is Cuba going to be an issue for the General Assembly? Thank you.
I would start by the end. I don't think that Cuba will be an issue in the General Assembly. There might be some attempt to include it, but I hope it's not an issue, because after all, what could the OAS General Assembly do with Cuba? The sanctions were revoked. Cuba is not sanctioned by the General Assembly or by the OAS. It's not excluded or suspended. It's not suspended anymore. What we said was, okay, after 40-something years, why do you come and talk to the Council and discuss the pending matters, of course, because we do have a democratic charter, an Inter-American Charter on Human Rights, etc., etc. I mean, so you open the door and let them come and talk. If they don't want to come and talk, I don't see what we can do about it. We can drag them. And I feel that, so I think that no more changes will be made by that. And let me venture a scenario which I don't think will happen, but imagine it will happen. Imagine that the Assembly would say, let's eliminate the condition of the dialogue. I still think that they won't come, because they don't want to sit where you tell them about the democratic charter. And that's what, from my point of view, doesn't make sense. From a democratic point of view, I mean, we're giving it too easy. A country which is poor, who has several problems, who doesn't have a democracy, doesn't have to face anybody to discuss about democracy because somebody is turning into a symbol of something. I mean, somebody said in the meeting, I'm not talking about the US, of course, I'm talking about the others. Cuba is a symbol. I don't know what Cuba is a symbol of. I don't feel it's a symbol of anything. But some people tend, and several countries tend to feel that it's a symbol of something that is already gone. So from my point of view, it would be better for them to be there. Of course, Honduras would, I mean, I would have not invited Cuba to the summit if they were suspended from the Inter-American system. But Cuba is not now suspended from the Inter-American system, and Micheletti was suspended from the Inter-American system. Actually, no country in the world, there wasn't one country in the world to recognize the government of Mr. Micheletti. Probably if there had been one, let's imagine one observer from the OAS, one of the, how many observers do we have, 70-something? Could have raised his hand and saying, why don't you invite Mr. Micheletti? No, because nobody recognized him. So the problem would have never come up. The government of Micheletti was never recognized by any independent country in the world. If some had recognized it, probably I would have examined the matter.
Yes.
Thank you. Ruben Barrera with Notimex, Mexico. Going back to the issue of Cuba, I'm going to try to put this in a very simplistic way, and also a very simplistic analogy, because for me, the issue of Cuba sounds like the girl Cuba who doesn't want to marry the boy, the OAS or the Inter-American system, even when the rest of the family of her family has accepted the boy. So the question is, I mean, what is the use to continuing this issue when the country in the middle of the discussion, Cuba, doesn't, apparently doesn't want or doesn't have any interest to return to the Inter-American system. So, I mean, this sounds sometimes like just a waste of time.
Well, I was trying to say, from my point of view, we settled the issue on the Assembly of San Pedro Sula in 2 years ago. So or 3 years ago. The issue shouldn't come up again. Now, if it comes up, I will say, somebody will say, let's bring Cuba back to the OAS. But as you say very well, they don't want to come. Now, why don't they want to come? Because they're still stuck on the Cold War. I mean, and after all, of course, I don't think Cuba can be identified as a democracy, but it does have a public opinion. It does have a public opinion. It does have, the government has to explain their people something, and explain them that after saying bad things about the OAS for 50 years, now they're saying we're going to go back to the OAS period. No, Cuba doesn't want to go back to the OAS. So as you say, that part of the problem doesn't exist. No country is saying we are not willing to go back to the OAS until Cuba goes back there, because actually Cuba is a member of the OAS. Every country in the Americas that has signed the charter is a member of the OAS. And Cuba signed the charter, ratified the charter, signed the TIAR, the Inter-American Reciprocal Defense Treaty, and has never disavowed it. So Cuba is a member of the OAS. Now, if they don't want to come by the procedures that the General Assembly settled, well, that's their problem. It's not our problem. But we're not going to talk about, I mean, that's why I'm quite reluctant to talk about Cuba. From my point of view, the issue with Cuba is now more a bilateral problem. We did away with that problem 3 years ago, and we did it in a way, by the way, that was accepted by every country. All the other 34 were sitting on the table and voted favorably on the resolution on Cuba. There were no dissents on this matter. No country even made a footnote.
Did it matter that President Chavez of Venezuela was not there?
No, I think that everybody was, felt that the reason he was not there was on account of his illness. And frankly, some felt relief that he had not made the effort because it would have been probably very damaging for his health. But except for good wishes for a recovery, it certainly was not a political matter, certainly.
All the way in the back.
Arturo Lopez Levy from the University of Denver. Some questions on the issue of Cuba. I'm sorry if we go back to the topic. But I think that from the resolution of San Pedro Sula, there were conditions that could take advantage of the fact that President Raul Castro answered to the visit of Chancellor Holguín, and he said that he was interested. Because I think the resolution is not clear how this dialogue will begin. It said that Cuba need to express interest, but in this case, Cuba said, I would like to go. Obviously, they don't say that they want to come back to the OAS, but there are areas of the OAS, let's say the Inter-American Committee Against Terrorism, the Pan-American Society of History and Geography, in which this type of interaction could begin to happen if there is a discussion at the highest level. The second thing is that you mentioned that Cuba is a member, but in the business community dialogues, in the civil society dialogues, in many of the other dialogues, people from the island are not included. Even people, I know that from my own experience when I came to America in 2001. I came from Israel, but I was also a Cuban citizen. We are not eligible for OAS fellowships. So this is something that is not connected with the government, but some actions can be taken in this direction. So my question goes to the period between summit. Can the OAS, or do you see any way that these areas, let's say anti-terrorism cooperation, cooperation against climate change, anti-drugs cooperation, these areas of the inter-American system can be open to some type of interaction without sacrificing the democratic governance norm?
Well, thank you. Let me tell you that we have discussed that matter. I will not make a definite statement, but I would certainly like to explore some of these matters of cooperation. I think those are also good avenues to begin our approach. Actually, I think that I'm not really sure. I have to review, but I think I'm right saying that the resolution of San Pedro Sula refers to the Permanent Council, a dialogue with the Permanent Council. Of course, I would agree with you that the Permanent Council is formed by exactly the same governments that were represented in Cartagena. So it's purely, that only tends to prove my point that the issue for the Cubans are not the 34 that are going to be sitting on the table. The issue with Cuba is the OAS, because they would have to explain to their people why they're going back to the OAS, even to their party, to their cadres, to everybody, and they don't find a reason to do that. But I think that the possibility of, I am open at least to discuss the possibility of participating in some technical meetings and all that. It has never been possible, however. It has never been possible. I would say that has been a more flexible view when the OAS participates in organizations to join meetings with organizations in which Cuba is included, like the American Summit and all that. But we haven't gone further than that. Certainly, I will welcome some form of finding some ways of cooperation that do not go against the basic mandate of the Assembly.
We have time for perhaps one or two more questions. Let's take this gentleman in the middle. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. James Hooser, Georgetown University. You mentioned that government ministers attending civil society forums and that discussed indigenous, gender, and labor issues in the hemisphere, and perhaps hearing things that they didn't necessarily want to hear. In your opinion, do you think that, considering that many of these nations in the hemisphere still have outstanding issues with regards to all those rights, that attending the summit, they will take into account in their domestic policies what they heard at the summit? Thank you.
Well, I think that the summit does have a repercussion in countries. I mean, a lot of people pay attention to that. And I always looked at it in another way. I mean, from this point of view, they have a repercussion in policy. If they didn't have a repercussion in internal politics or policies, probably the heads would not be willing to refer to those issues in the summit. You see, one good thing about the summit is that all the issues are relevant because they are relevant to their components, which are the presidents of the countries that are going to be involved. It's rare that countries go to summits to discuss things that are not an issue in their country. And let me tell you, if I take a look at the region, the issues of the summit certainly are a problem for each of the countries. If you take, let's add to the issue of competitive education, that's a big problem. In my own country, it was a big issue the past few years, a couple of years. The issue of energy. Well, I'm going to just put my country as we are probably the country has the costliest energy in all South America. Crime is a big problem for every country. Drug traffic, organized crime. The issue of poverty and inequality. Well, as you know, there are two Latin American countries which are members of the OECD. And in the last ranking of inequality, they rank last and second to last. So certainly the problem of inequality is an issue for them. So I think that some of the matters that are going to be dealt with, probably some of the work we are going to be doing, starting from the mandates, because the mandates are very general. But some of the work that we do with them, for example, I think that the experience in the past summit of Trinidad and Tobago that was put into the social protection network was very important to stimulate some countries to establish programs for microcredit or for conditional transfers or cash transfers. Though when we had Trinidad and Tobago, Brazil was just starting with those policies, and Mexico and Chile had already started on some of those, but they weren't as popular as they have become later. So the summit acts as a sounding board for policies that some countries may be carrying out to expand it to the rest of the region. Of course, if you look mandate by mandate, probably you won't find that degree of repercussion. I think it's a more general thing. Can I say a last thing?
Sure, please.
Well, the fact that, just one sentence to provoke, the fact that we have talked so much about Cuba just shows that this is a U.S. problem. I mean, a lot of people in the U.S. are concerned about the other guys meet Cuba every 15 days in some meetings across the Americas. So this is certainly not helping. It's not helping because it's happening in a different way. And I think that we should also consider that fact. I mean, is it worth it? I mean, is it worth it to keep a situation that's completely artificial for the rest of the countries in the region, and which, by the way, to defend the policy that has not succeeded in the past 50 years? That's the main problem. It's not a question about democracy. I think I've been very clear about my belief about Cuba. I'm not saying that Cuba is a democracy. I think it's not really worth it to divide the Americas on this issue. That's it.
Well, let's let that be the final word. Thank you very much, Secretary General Insulza, for joining us for this conversation.